At this point, hopefully you've done your homework and you found a PoE switch that's a good fit for your home network. If you haven't, no worries. I'll include a link in the description to a video that details how you can pick out the right PoE switch for your home network. But once you have your switch picked out, we're ready to start implementing PoE. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up this TP-Link PoE Plus switch. It's a TL-SG1005P switch. But just keep in mind, if you have a different make or model of PoE switch, the steps for setting up the device will be the same. The features just might be a little bit different. In order to set up our PoE switch, there's a few things we need. You need an Ethernet cable to connect your PoE switch and your router. You need another Ethernet cable to connect your PoE switch and your PoE device. This Ethernet cable you need to make sure is PoE compatible. We'll get into this in a little bit here, so no worries about that for right now. You also need a power source. You need your power adapter and power cord for your PoE switch. You need your PoE switch itself. And then you also need an available power outlet so you can connect your PoE switch into the wall. With all of these things on hand, we're ready to start setting up our PoE switch. The first thing we want to do is we want to get the power cord and power adapter all set up so your PoE switch can get power. What we need to do, you need to take the power cord, connect it to the PoE adapter here on the back of the device. That's pretty straightforward. And then you want to take this end of the power cord, connect it to the back of your PoE switch. There's really only one place on the back that it can go to, so it plugs right in there. So now we have our power cord connected, and we just want to take the other end and plug it into the outlet that we're going to use to power on our PoE switch. Once you plug in your PoE switch, you should see a little status light there. The device will boot up, but there'll be a constant status light showing that the device has power. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to connect your PoE switch to your router with an Ethernet cable. My router is in a separate room, but your router will look something like this. It will have open Ethernet ports on the back of it. Pick any one of those. Connect one end of the Ethernet cable to one of those open Ethernet ports. And then the other end of the Ethernet cable, you'll want to plug into your PoE switch. One thing that's important to note about this step is that the Ethernet cable needs to plug into port 5 on this switch. Ports 1 through 4 are for the PoE devices. Port 5 is strictly made for connecting your switch and your router. You know this because all of the other ports have two little lights in the corner of each port, but the 5th port only has one light. And I'll show you a close-up picture so you can see what I mean. But basically, those ports with two lights over the top of the port, one of those ports will indicate the power or PoE that's being delivered through that port. The other light will be indicating the data that's being transferred to and from that port. With that 5th port, it only has one light, and the only light that exists is the data indication light. It doesn't have a PoE indication light. In other words, it's not meant to be used for PoE. So what happens here is when we connect our router to our switch, you might be able to see it there in the corner of the port itself. I guess, yeah, there you can see it a little bit. There's that one link light that's lit up green. It's indicating your data connection's in place. And there's no other light that's lit up because this port doesn't have a PoE light. Okay, now with our PoE switch connected to our router, the next thing we need to do is connect a PoE device to our PoE switch with an Ethernet cable. But here's where you need to be extra careful about the type of Ethernet cable that you're using for this connection. You need to make sure that the Ethernet cable itself is rated to be used with PoE. The two indications that you need to keep in mind: the Ethernet cable needs to be at least Cat5e or above, and the wires that make up the Ethernet cable need to be made of fully copper wires. I've previously made another video detailing about how exactly to figure out if your Ethernet cable can be used for PoE, but just keep in mind that if your PoE device or your PoE switch comes with an Ethernet cable, it will be fine and you know it will be compatible with PoE. Another thing I should mention is that this Ethernet cable connecting your switch and your PoE device, that's the only one that you need to make sure is rated for PoE. The Ethernet cable that's connecting your router and your PoE switch, that doesn't necessarily need to be routed for PoE, just because those two devices, they're only going to be passing data to each other. They're not going to be passing power like you are between your switch and your PoE device. So the rating of that cable is much less important. All right, with that out of the way, let's take one end of our Ethernet cable and connect it to the back of our PoE switch. You'll want to connect this to port 1 of the PoE switch. You'll see why this is important when we talk about priority in a little bit here, but just start with port 1, then use port 2, port 3, etc. as you connect more PoE devices. Now we just need to connect the other end of this Ethernet cable to our PoE device. I have a TP-Link wireless access point here. It has one port on the back for an Ethernet cable. So upon connecting this Ethernet cable to the back of the device, you will see that it powers on. There's a blue indicator light. This device now has power. As you can obviously tell, this device isn't connected to a wall with a power outlet. The only thing connected to it is our PoE switch with our Ethernet cable, and this is the beauty of how PoE works. Now with our wireless access point powered on and connected to our PoE switch, let's take a closer look at our PoE switch and that port 1 that we connected it to. So here you can see on this PoE port 1, there are those two link lights that I indicated. One is for data, the other is indicating that it's being used for PoE. So both the status lights are green. It looks like we're in good shape here. Another thing I want to call attention to is that below the power light on the PoE switch, there's another light that says PoE Max. That light is not illuminated right now, but it's important to pay attention to that as you connect more devices to your PoE switch. As I mentioned, this switch is a PoE Plus switch. It has a maximum budget of 65 watts. And what you need to do is you need to keep in mind that each PoE device that you connect to your PoE switch will require some amount of power from that switch. If you exceed that 65 watts of power, that maximum budget for this switch, you won't have enough power to power on all your PoE devices, and as a result of that, some of your PoE devices will power off. This indicator light is meant to tell you when you're getting close to that limit. So how this works is the PoE Max light, it will be off if you're providing power to PoE devices between 0 and 58 watts. If you're between 58 and 64 watts, in other words, if you're approaching that PoE Max limit, the PoE Max light will turn green. And if you exceed that total 65 watt budget that this PoE switch has, the PoE Max light will blink. And what you'll start to notice is that some of the devices that you connect to your PoE switch will turn off when you exceed that maximum budget. The way that it works is this switch will prioritize, starting with PoE port 1, it will prioritize that PoE device, and then PoE port 2, it will then prioritize that device next, and so on and so forth until you run out of available power. Obviously, if you have a PoE device that's a priority, plug that into port 1 and assign priority that way, just so that way you know if you ever exceed your power budget, the devices that are the lowest priority will turn off first. Now that we have the mechanics of the PoE switch out of the way, another thing you want to keep in mind, let's talk about the location of where to put this PoE switch. PoE, thinking about what we're doing here, we're providing power through Ethernet cables to devices. This generates heat, and you don't want your PoE switch to overheat, so you want to make sure it's in an area that gets good airflow. This particular device, it doesn't have a fan, so it cools down with natural airflow. And as a result, you want to make sure you're not putting anything on top of this device, you're not smothering this device. Make sure it's in an open area that gets proper airflow so it doesn't overheat. There are a few other features on this PoE switch that I want to point your attention to in case you want to set them. On the back of the device, there's two little switches. Again, I can provide a close-up so you can see what those switches look like. One of those switches is an extend switch. And basically what it does is it allows you to use PoE over a very long Ethernet cable. If you're just using Ethernet cables for data, there's a limit of 100 meters or 328 feet before it will stop working properly. This is the same thing with PoE Ethernet cables, but with this extend feature, and it's primarily for ports 1 and 2 on your PoE switch, what you can do is you can use PoE with an Ethernet cable that's longer than 100 meters. If you move that extend switch to on, you can provide PoE power to a device that's up to 250 meters away, but there is something you have to give up here. In order to do that, you are decreasing the bandwidth that can be passed through that Ethernet cable. In other words, you're sacrificing some data bandwidth for more power over a longer distance. So what happens is if you turn this extend switch on, you can use the Ethernet cable, but it can only get 10 megabits per second instead of the standard 10 gigabits or 1 gigabit per second, depending upon the category of Ethernet cable you have. Obviously with 10 megabits per second, that's a pretty low bandwidth. So you want to make sure that if you're using this extend feature, you're using it to connect to a PoE device that's low bandwidth. Maybe something like a security camera. You definitely don't want to be using a wireless access point with this extend feature, just because this 10 megabits per second is not going to be enough bandwidth for devices to connect to that wireless access point and be transferring data to and from that device. The other switch on the back of this PoE switch is your recovery switch. Basically what this does is if the PoE switch notices that one of your PoE devices isn't functioning properly, it will try to automatically reboot that device. This is not something you want to implement if you have a PoE device connected to your switch that you only use occasionally, or you have a security camera that's only turned on for part of the day, because your switch will think that there's something wrong with the device when it's powered off, and it will try to automatically reboot it, and it will keep doing that. If you have the recovery switch set to off, it just means you have to manually reset your PoE devices if there's something wrong with them. In many cases, you're implementing PoE devices that are out of reach, and you would need a ladder or something to access them. But keep in mind that a lot of these devices have applications you can use, so you can reboot them from a distance. So even if you have recovery set off, you should still be able to manually reboot the device without having to physically access it. Now that you have a rundown of all your PoE switch features and your PoE device is connected to your PoE switch, you're going to want to test that device out, make sure it's working properly, and troubleshoot any connection issues you might have. I'd love to see in the comments section what you're using your PoE switch to power on and what your experience was running through these setup steps. And as always, thanks for watching this episode from Network from Home, and we'll catch you on the next one.